Deathloop is one of my newest favorites. It's also a game that falls just short of the pinnacle of what it could be. The front half of this review will be light on spoilers, while the back half will discuss the story to a greater degree. As Deathloop uses a refinement of the game engine from Dishonored 2, I'll also use this opportunity to discuss all of the Dishonored games heavily. Fair warning, this video will include major spoilers for every Dishonored game and Deathloop. These games are old enough that this review is more conversation than pure purchase recommendation. My picks: buy Dishonored 1 in the DLC, skip Dishonored 2, and buy Deathloop. I haven't actually played Death of the Outsider, though I do know some spoilers from that, but I still think my recommendation stands. Because this channel largely exists to see what I learn about storytelling from the things I consume, there will also be small spoilers of my first book, Coordinated Universal Time Travel. This review is me at my most opinionated, because when you like something this much, there's no sense in feigning objectivity. Deathloop is for people who like but don't love Dishonored. It's one of my favorite games, though I don't yet know where to rank it absolutely.
Okay, gotta do a switch. Around here somewhere.
I did the same thing everyone else did when I got a Steam Deck. I immediately bought a bunch of games on sale, never played them, and went back to playing old favorites. Within that, I wound up playing Dishonored again, which I had played and enjoyed sometime around 2015. I ended up playing the DLC, which I had purchased way back when, yet never actually got around to playing. I wound up enjoying the game much more than I originally did, with the world building and level design being by far my favorite aspect. When I played Dishonored 2 shortly afterwards, I felt completely underwhelmed. The game was better, but the experience was worse. I just couldn't get into the story because it made no real sense to me. In the end of Dishonored 1's DLC, Dowd dealt with Delilah, and in my playthrough, I trapped her into a painting. The entire story of Dishonored 2 consists of 1. Delilah's back. 2. Another Imperial coup. 3. You have to track down and kill the conspirators. 4. Find out how Delilah came back. 5. Defeat Delilah by either killing her or trapping her once again in her own fantasy or in some alternate pocket to prevent killing her. The problem I have is that even though I'm being reductionist here, all of those plot points were done better in Dishonored 1 and its DLC. I just don't see the point of having Dishonored 2. Even the fact that they have another infestation to mirror the rat plague was a disappointment to me. The pitfall of a sequel is when you retread the original's path with a new sheen. I think this happens often in games because games are so mechanical. However, even if you're doing the same genre of story, I think you have to at least hit different beats. Back to the Future Part 2 is amongst my favorite movies because it expands on the concept from the first in a way that doesn't leave it feeling like an unimaginative retread of the first. And within the context of gaming, Majora's Mask is an excellent sequel that takes the same engine as Ocarina of Time, but pushes it to a new level and does an entirely different kind of story and has an entirely different gameplay loop, while still having the core appeal of the prior game. Dishonored 2 should have went in that kind of direction. It should have been bolder. In a world where Dishonored 1 doesn't exist, my opinion of Dishonored 2 doubles. I played Dishonored 1 and its DLC over 3 to 4 weeks, which is typical for me when a game seizes my attention. However, I started Dishonored 2 in May 2023, and I didn't finish it until April 2025, which is an obvious sign that I forced myself to finish. With all that said, I didn't have an urge to play Death of the Outsider, so I broke my rules and watched YouTube for spoilers. I liked the plot concept and the basic endpoint, but I still didn't have a real urge to play the game, even though I own it. Now, this isn't a channel where I incessantly harp on games I don't like, but pointing out just how dissatisfied I was with Dishonored 2 makes it clear why I love Deathloop so much. I had my eye on Deathloop from the moment I heard the premise, but ultimately I got Deathloop as a Christmas gift from my mother-in-law. I have way too many games in my backlog to play many games at full price or even during their launch windows. And in this case, even after getting it well after it had come out. I primarily played on my workstation with mouse and keyboard, an AMD RX 9070, 96 gigabytes of RAM, and a 16-core Ryzen 5900 XT. I also played some on my Steam Deck, in bed, or on the couch. Weakening gamepad auto-aim while using the Steam Deck actually helped balance my power level in the late game, but I still had a balance challenge on the mouse and keyboard when playing on PC. I had objective markers off for the most part, as in many ways, there's no real reason for Colt to know where he's going for most of the story. Despite having this option, Deathloop is obviously designed for objective markers. This is a similar kind of failure to what I feel in Dishonored. For example, other than my first Juliana invasion, I had no idea where any of the antennas or to open the exits were. In-world clues aren't always strong enough to guide you without the markers, which caused me to misunderstand the infusion quest and lose my progress during one loop. An ongoing plague for the Void engine from Dishonored 2 onwards is that the PC ports are terrible. Memory leaks led to multiple crashes while playing Deathloop, and at least 4 hours of lost playtime. In those loops, I had great kills of invading Julianas, particularly early in the game, had great finds, great loot, but I lost those bits of gameplay entirely. This game's hard checkpoints counter aggressive save scumming that I'm absolutely guilty of using within Dishonored and just about every other game. I appreciate games designed around limited saving because on some level, I understand that you can't entirely trust the audience to self-enforce that, but you have to be absolutely stable if you're going down this route. This game came out in 2021, and at many times I can say it ran like absolute crap, despite running on a powerful workstation. I had many of the same crashing and slowdown problems while playing Dishonored 2, so it's kind of sad that even though they had time, they didn't really improve core stability. And I'm not a graphics hound, yet I do believe that AAA gaming has been awful at optimization for at least 5 years. The games look good, but oftentimes they have no business running at the weak frame rates that they do. And I'd say Deathloop falls prey to this terribly. I feared game crashes more than an overpowered Juliana invasion, and that is just a sign of terrible programming. Now, there's an extremely obvious reason why I like this game, because it's an immersive sim with Dishonored powers, fun gunplay, and it's centered around a character-centric time loop. And if you follow me for anything more than just this channel, you know that my first book, Coordinated Universal Time Travel, is a story about a man in a time loop where he dies each night and keeps his memories. But both stories revolve around character dynamics of two people who remember things across time loops. And obviously, these comparisons break down beyond the most superficial sense. But this coincidence ensured that I'd have an affinity for Deathloop. And I'd say here that it's really important to note that so much of taste in things comes down to these just weird little occurrences of, hey, somebody's making something that is just feels like so targeted to you that it's just kind of funny. And this brings me into a vague old man complaint that I think I'm finally old enough to have, actually, where I hate how consensus driven everything trends in online discourse. I don't really care if something else sold better, reviewed better, is liked by, I don't know, whatever any individual would consider a better group of people. I see no sense in folding my opinions into that mainstream or into, whatever the dominant viewpoint on something is. I also don't think you should have to apologize for liking the things that you like. Now, keep in mind, I've not broken through this social landscape completely unscathed, so demerit me for every unnecessary opinion qualifying statement in this review and onwards. Now, Deathloop is absolutely better than Dishonored. It's a superset of everything that matters and a solid improvement on many fronts. The only thing Deathloop lacks versus Dishonored's combat is enemy variety. The walkers, clockwork soldiers, rats, and other oddities of Dishonored go a long way to fleshing out the world and creating more alternate gameplay scenarios with the same basic tools. However, in Deathloop's world, the lack of wildlife and the relative simplicity of the enemies makes perfect sense. The Eternalists are largely goofball hedonists and dopey scientists, while Colt is a decorated war hero who knows the future and can revive within the same day. Colt is Blackreef's apex predator, and the torture chamber side quest makes that absolutely clear. So when visionaries die with a single headshot, or your fully loaded cult becomes a giant ball of death, it makes perfect sense within the world and for the character. Dishonored's morality system dissuaded players from using the very fun battle system and pushed them towards stealth, which was fun, but not nearly as much as the combat mechanics. My favorite thing while playing those games was hiding as best as I could, then going all out when my cover broke. There's a contrasting rhythm between loud and quiet gameplay that gets muted when it's all ghost mode stealth all the time. I'd even argue that many of the non-violent ways of dealing with bosses were still awful. See Jindosh and Lady Boyle. Yet, the game treats you like a kind-hearted soul for doing that. Is it better to have taken Delilah and killed her at the end of the first Dishonored DLC than trapping her in the portrait world? And I feel like that should be an actual debate with some kind of weight within the gameplay world. But I don't think that you really get to have that kind of feeling. And the scope of magic within the world also makes me question whether a lot of these punishing fates are really permanent. Will the prideful, savage Jindosh really forgive Corvo and Emily after a magical breakthrough unfuddles his mind? And most importantly, Dishonored's endings have much more of a good ending, bad ending style. This naturally emerges anytime you have to pick a canon ending. The endings lose punch because they don't feel integrally linked to player action. Kill 1 in 20 people you encounter and you're still considered a saint. The concept of the morality system itself wasn't the problem, but the weakly structured payoff and the heavy-handed grading subtracted from the strongest aspect of Dishonored's gameplay. Strangely, the morality system would have worked much better in Deathloop. Sure, everyone comes back to life with every loop, but make the incessant violence warp Colt's mind further and further. Make it a plot point. Make it drive character development in a truly interactive way. Have him break down like something out of, Eternal Darkness back on GameCube. Deathloop is way more character driven than Dishonored, and a little extra causality for all the casualties would go a long way. All that aside, Deathloop benefits from being the third iteration of this combat formula. The addition of real gunplay feels right at home with the powers largely lifted from Dishonored. It even has enough looter shooter DNA to deliver meaningful rewards for completing quests and exploring Blackreef throughout much of your gameplay loop. A few heavier enemies would increase the value of these rewards, but it's so satisfying getting in over your head with a swarm of Eternalists and having to fight your way to a hiding place before things calm down. It's everything I liked about Dishonored's combat pushed into the style that I love. The Void Engine's strongest aspect is its player motion. You can climb just about anything, vault over low ledges, and even running is generally thrilling. Having to choose your loadout helps limit the power scaling and prevents you just from having every single tool to handle every single problem in every single perfect kind of way. And it also forces you to get a little bit deeper with some of the things that you might choose to love. Colt feels squishier than Corvo, as semi-autos are deadlier than single-shot pistols, and you can't just deflect bullets with your sword. Having your cover broken and seeing dozens of Eternalists coming your way is even more threatening without quick saving because it makes every encounter more substantial. There's actual pressure to perform and not lose what you set up during the loop. Side note, every game that allows save scumming is effectively a time travel game. I'd even argue the same for playing chess with takebacks. The ability to reload from 30 seconds before you did something absolutely stupid is the most powerful ability in any game. And I wish that there were more game designs that could really play with this aspect. As for Deathloop's core powers, the invisibility plus teleport combo is just too powerful for its own good, yet it's also too fun for its own good. Despite my intentions, I never replay games as much as I plan to, so sometime within the next 10 years, I'll revisit Deathloop and challenge myself not to lean on Aether and Shift as crutches. The Shift Blink ability is the best part of Dishonored, and it's still a blast to use here. The body switch upgrade takes me all the way back to when I was reading Naruto, and makes me wish this game had a new game plus so that I could use that from the start. Having limited capacity to equip the upgrades actually makes for unique configurations and does help scale power levels to some extent. This helps balance both the PvP and the PvE portions of the gameplay. I enjoyed Juliana's invasions way more than those of Dark Souls because it's balanced more heavily in the defender's favor. The time to kill is low, healing isn't on demand, and there's less space for min-maxing. In addition to that, Colt gets 3 lives to Juliana's 1, and you get your lives back if you kill her. So her invasions were a perfect stressor when you're trying to sneak into some of the game's densest strongholds, such as Fia's bunker or Lexus's party. The ability to rig enemy mines and traps bailed me out of more than a few sticky situations, and it was always really funny to just hear, a Juliana blowing up when I was really in deep trouble and just get bailed out by something like that. Having Juliana as another player invading your game also fits really well with the story. She already knows what will happen because you can only invade if you've already beat the game. I only had a handful of Julianas that actively made the game worse, including one who kept killing visionaries for me. I'd say that's a much better circumstance than what I tend to get within Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Oftentimes, fighting and dealing with the invaders it's a bit of a nuisance because I feel like that gameplay, the combat works so much better as player versus environment than player versus player. Ocarina of Time and Chrono Trigger are some of my favorite games, yet I'm fully in favor of voiced protagonists, whether you have voice actors or you're just using lines. I don't need a character to be me. I don't need a character to just be a stand-in or a conduit vessel for me. I really think that I need a character to be himself. I want to have a strong feeling of what life he's hoping to live when the movie's over. I love it when protagonists are forced into genuinely dramatic choices that reveal who they really are and what truly drives them. For the most part, Deathloop gives me exactly what I want. There are a few stumbles, but I'll cover those more closely in the finale section.
Shit, fuck.
Amnesia is so convenient for video game storytelling that I don't give video games any credit for using it. So Colt started off on bad footing with me. In the first stretch of the game, I feared that Colt would be too quippy to feel genuine, too chatty for his own good, and so loud that he'd ruin the best moments. Yet by a few hours in, I was fully on board. After about 10 hours, I was role-playing everything from moment to moment, thinking, what would Colt do? And in the finale, I made the choice I thought he'd make. Even if it's not considered the golden ending, I wholeheartedly consider it to be the best outcome. His motivation for breaking the loop isn't well defined outside of the immediate physical need to break out of a prison where virtually everyone wants to kill him. On its face, that's enough to carry a simple game, but it's not enough to really deliver a complete thematic punch. And to the extent that Deathloop nudges in that direction, primarily through lore, which I'll touch on as well later, I think it really serves Colt well. But to also a certain extent, by making breaking the loop so much bigger than everything else, it does put a little bit of a ceiling.
Hey, can you just tell me how to get out of here?
Talking to yourself?
What?
As for Juliana, she had all the makings of a terminally annoying character, but the writers did a good job of giving her depth. She's cynical, mean-spirited, holier than thou, yet the writing is not ignorant to this fact, and that is just such a great thing. Her overconfidence and evasiveness strengthens the early mystery, though it doesn't always add up to powerful character moments. The invasions give her a constant presence, though I wish she had a more physically present role within the story. Having her pop up with no intent to kill you would have been chilling and funny. Her motivation was one of the core mysteries I had, as I quickly keyed in on her mean girl aspects being something of a front. She has all the means to easily stop Colt from breaking the loop, but she's more interested in watching and judging his progress like she's watching Netflix. The game dips a toe into elaborating on her motivation, but I wish it went a step further in fleshing out her contradictions. Underlying character truly shines brightest when using their contradictions as a lens. We get plenty of these during the bevy of unique radio conversations between Colt and Juliana.
I don't think you know what real evil is.
You're right, Captain.
Yeah? Just wait until you see my next trick.
Face yourself. Don't want you pulling a hammy. How old are you again?
Fuck you. I'm no older than 29.
Oh, you are a live one, Captain. Spicy.
Home sweet home.
These radio conversations were a major highlight in the game, alternating between banter, teasing, and actual plot details. I picked up on their relationship in the My Place or Yours call, yet I couldn't quite nail everything down. This is a great example of the game not being too precious with its secrets. Even before it's confirmed, I was given enough detail to figure out the main character twist. This detailed structure actually increases the pace because the story worries less about fooling the audience and more about making characters follow their motivations from moment to moment. This is a very key lesson that I'm going to take close to heart.
Yeah, what?
It's totally normal. Death is a typical physiological experience in this place. There is nothing to be ashamed of.
I hate to break it to you, but there is nothing normal about this fucking island.
You see?
Now, imagine this game with a silent cult. Those conversations would be one-sided struggle sessions. In Dishonored 1, Corvo's silence limits the character depth you can build because definition and depth go hand in hand. This then creates an odd shift when he starts speaking in Dishonored 2 because you feel like you're on flat footing. I dislike silent protagonists once again, even though Chrono Trigger and Ocarina of Time are my gun to the head top two video games. So I'm obviously not an absolutist on this standpoint. Because Corvo's voice wasn't in the first game, it felt like you were behind schedule on defining his character. And I think this would have been less jarring had I played Emily. Back to Deathloop, this game is whimsical in its setting, which makes Colt's goofiness fit right in and push that element over the top. For almost the entire game, I rode the perfect wave of combat, difficulty, and exploration. Up until the last loop finally locked in, I had a great variety of things to do and never felt stifled, because even when you die, you learn. The gameplay and narrative meshed beautifully, which made it way easier to roleplay Colt as the game went on. As soon as the game's visceral goal became clear, I was piecing together my schedule for killing all the visionaries. Even while focusing on side quests and weaponry, I routinely stumble into details that helped advance the main plot, whether or not I understood it at the moment. I see flow as a quality that emerges when the reward to effort ratio is balanced appropriately. Progress in plot or equipment that comes entirely too easy doesn't create gameplay flow. For example, getting mid-game weapons from the start via digital deluxe edition. However, progress that is too difficult also restricts flow. Getting stuck on a boss in a linear RPG and having to grind heavily to overcome it, as in old JRPGs. However, Deathloop flows nicely because it's so easy to make progress just about anywhere you go. Each zone is dense with its secrets and charms, from spy outposts to military archives to the coital center to varied routes in and out of the visionary compounds. The hidden depths give each zone extra life, and the shifts throughout the day provide fun wrinkles. Seeing Otto's fireworks shop burnt down messed up my schedule for that day, but I spent my time searching Updom over instead. In my first daytime trip to Updom, I'd actually destroyed the relevant generators for that quest, but I didn't return later to see how it changed the future. It was a delight to realize that Deathloop's progression is primarily knowledge-based. This lets you make genuine progress even when you die. Sure, you'll miss out on your planned activities for later that day, but for most of the game, you'll have a massive amount of things to do across other points of the day. Time passes in chunks as you move from zone to zone. This gives you space to explore, but the threat of invasion, and sadly, crashes, imparts a sense of urgency, as does the game's purposefully limited save system. The game only saves between missions, which ups the tension dramatically from moment to moment. Choices naturally become more real when there's a punishment for failing and an inconvenience that is more than just hitting F9 to reload. Now, of course, cannot say it enough. The crashes, the memory leaks were so terrible because they impeded my flow by oftentimes making me rush exploration for fear of losing progress. I should also add that the game only has a one save file per installation limit, which is completely absurd. It wouldn't be hard to have at least a few files so that I could play this game back from scratch again without having to hard delete my save data and then have Steam propagate that to all my devices. Multiplayer isn't the main dish, so I really think this is a mistake. And even with multiplayer, they should have allowed you to have a global save that kind of keeps your overall stats and your overall things and elements for multiplayer while letting you still have your cult progress. And it's weird because they kind of already do this, but I don't know. It just does not make any sense to just have one save file for this game.
What kind of fucked up world is this? Ah!
This game can't entirely be played blindly without objective markers, but it's much better at that than Dishonored because of how much familiarity repetition forces you to build. In your first loop, just finding Colt's apartment without a marker is a challenge, but by your last loop, you can run right through in about 5 minutes per map. This was helpful because it keeps the punishment for death balanced. Some quests are tough to advance, relying on recognizing small details within a given day, and having objective markers turned off for most of the game caused me to misunderstand the starting point for the radio silence quest, which is amongst the game's most pivotal. So instead of checking it out early, I stumbled into the quest around somewhere between 40 to 50% of my playthrough while I was trying to get into a garage that I actually just thought was part of some random side quest. That was for the best because by that point I was well equipped and well versed enough to go after the other Horizon stations with little to no distraction. Of course, I accidentally destroyed 2 power generators and died after visiting my first station, but this created a small but exciting episode within the game because death became more memorable when it had a real cost, as opposed to me thinking back to any of the Dishonored games. There really isn't some great death moment within the gameplay that really stands out to me like that. While I was doing that quest, the Colt Juliana relationship still had me twisted. And I'd say until about 20 hours in, when I became convinced that the jilted explanation was a complete misdirect, small bits here and there helped me whittle down possibilities. Even with everything revealed, I was pleased to find that I figured it out shortly before. That's just about perfect timing when it comes to a foreshadowed twist. That's not easy even in a linear story, so to find that in a game this open-ending is truly exciting. I can't tell if it's a quirk of how my playthrough panned out or whether it was structured and programmed to come out this way. But that's what I want to feel in a non-linear story. Deathloop strikes a balance between being open and being bespoke. Around this moment, the gameplay hit its absolute highest points. The ratios between known to unknown and power to danger peaked. Setting goals bit by bit and figuring out what ought to come next was thrilling. I'd set a schedule each day, try to scour areas for every bit of detail, pour through side quests in search of loose plot threads, and extra just little tiny secrets. By the time I loaded up the final day, I was just absolutely busting. Deathloop had a legitimate chance to become my favorite game. Genuinely, that's not at all what I thought would happen when I started playing this. And that's the best kind of surprise when you love a game you only expected to like. All the game needed to do was stick the landing, and everything up through my final loop was super intense. Accidentally getting spotted while trying to drown Charlie and Fia and making a mad dash to the exit that only succeeded because I got reprised outside of the elevator shaft. Then I didn't realize that Igor and Wenji were right above me while I was sneaking through Alexis's party at the end. And for a final bit of color, I got invaded on my way out while heading to the rocket. So the table was set amazingly. Action, characters, setting, plot, and lore had come together so strongly that I had every reason to believe that this would be an amazing ending. But the finale itself is what keeps this game from topping my list. This is the most spoiler-heavy section, so skip ahead if absolutely necessary. The finale is an utter letdown. It's a massive hint when there's no point to tease. It doesn't bring any of the character work home and is much too abrupt for all its build-up. In the end, many details felt more like a J.J. Abrams mystery box than a carefully crafted mystery. Juliana's motivation isn't something that should be shielded if you're doing a story that ends with a focus on resolving plot/world details. But the structure of the ending is so obviously character centric that it needs more oomph with respect to the ending. The motivations don't add up that well, and the characters become less interesting rather than more interesting on the other side. Now, I call it a letdown, but the ending is fine in the it's just a game sense. But it's a letdown because it could have been so much stronger thematically.
Justice state.
Life's full of maybes, Juliana. That's what makes it life.
The odds are against us.
Always are.
Now, the final face-off is such an awesome scene, but the game really rushes it, as if it's afraid to really bite in and unpack the intricacies it's been piling up. Why doesn't Colt ask about Lila? Why doesn't he have a bigger reaction to reconciling with his daughter? Why is Juliana testing Colt at this point? Has she really seen it all, or is that just another mean girl bluff? The alternate Colt reveals his original motivation was to save Lila, but this thread never gets picked up. Colt just takes it in stride that it can't be done. This creates a weakness in the plot as the story starts at the foundational universal motive, survive, then alludes to higher motives like rebuilding his family or making up for lost time. Then it just hurls all that out. There's a little blurb in between the credits that almost gets to what I want, that almost twists this into something that's ideal. But why does that conversation hang on just drinking and killing Alexis again? Is that really the big, amazing revelation that Juliana wanted to share with Colt? The game is wacky in many ways, but the core of it is serious. Everything in the ending where you don't shoot Juliana is set up for the two to actually open up and talk about the pain, talk about the problems, talk about how weird it is to grow up without your dad when it's not his fault that he's gone. Talk about how weird it is to have all this missing time that you have a daughter that you had no idea about. And there's a hint, just a super tantalizing hint of that, but not enough given the desperation of the character to reach this point, given how hard he has to work to get here, given how much he has to learn about himself to get to this point. It should have been more. And I think that the game would have benefited from more conversation before the face-off. Imagine having an actual dialogue with her. This one-on-one would have benefited from being inside a game with a Fallout-style conversation system or something from Mass Effect.
Look, there's thousands of us, or more. I don't know, but none of us have gotten it right. Okay. You've got to be better than all of us, so don't just try to shoot everything. But I like shooting things. You've got to be smart. It's the only way to fix this. This and this.
I prefer the Cold Storm plan.
Angie's lab.
Now, we'd all love just about any game if it followed our tastes, even just a smidge more. But Deathloop threw away a perfectly good chicken wing with plenty of meat on the bone. As a storyteller, I don't believe that every plot point has to be perfectly tidied. Openness actually enlarges worlds. However, I do believe that you have to punch as hard as you can at anything you choose to hit. Deathloop pulls a punch, electing to win by a lore-based TKO when there were multiple chances for a plot-focused KO. Let's return to my evergreen rant. Lore is not plot. Lore is strong for establishing and expanding environments, but it's terrible at maintaining focus and managing pacing. When players have complete control, pacing is almost impossible to get right across the board. It's not just what you find, but it's the order and the timing in which you find it. Plot emerges when events are tightly coupled and fades when causality breaks down. Lore works in contrasting fashion, as the exact same character and world details can be broken apart, split across item descriptions, apocalypse logs, and audio monologues. This benefits loosely coupled events common in non-linear games. However, it's like watching a fight get settled on technicalities rather than getting a knockout, and we all know what you're actually looking for. I flat out believe lore's unquestioned dominance over plot in video game storytelling is a massive failing. Lore makes it easy to create mystery boxes that inspire 3-hour video essays and generate millions of fan theories. But lore also makes it easy for aimless writing to develop a pretentious air. Lore lets writers avoid direct responsibility for plot placing, structured revelations, and working out themes. Lore creates foolish conversations like, oh, if you find 5 big details hidden corners behind obscure puzzles, combine that with a trace detail on an item texture and a chance quest you only found out about by obsessively watching YouTube or reading 100% walkthroughs. The entire story makes perfect sense. Most high budget game writing is done by committee and relegated to generating excuse plots to chain together levels. See Dishonored 2. Outside in, I'll say lore is easier to build at scale than plot. Everything just has to be checked against an overarching story Bible, but there's less ground to fight over when you are dealing with elements less than half of the audience will find. Yet, even when the detail exists in the world, lore dominance dampens its value because the plot must fall further out of focus to increase the value of finding each bit of lore. While Deathloop isn't as lore dominant as Dark Souls or Elden Ring, the lore still carries hefty weight. The balance is very good between plot and lore here, but the lore is guilty of writing checks that the plot never cashes. That's a huge problem, a massive problem, a problem so heavy that it turns what should have been a full-fat sledgehammer into a 0-calorie, borderline tried ending. The ending is too indecisive and it's too clingy with its mysteries. And that's an undeniable shame, as Deathloop's high budget to weirdness ratio makes a sequel very unlikely. The Golden Loop patch was nice, but it did nothing for my preferred ending, and a big patch pales in comparison to story DLC or a standalone expansion. I'd pay good money for one more location and a new, more cohesive ending. I'll be genuinely surprised if Deathloop ever gets a sequel. We're much more likely to see a Dishonored 3 than a Deathloop 2. The only hope I have is a Deathloop prequel that doubles as Dishonored 3 with Colt's military exploits. That's not impossible, but with each of these games selling less than the last and Arcane being sold to Microsoft, I genuinely doubt they'll escape the pressures of chasing the bottom line. Arcane Austin's death might steer the studio's overlords in the right direction, but is that really a sensible bet? Despite creating many great games, Dishonored 1 is Arcane's only outsized sales success. Even though it likely contributed to moving on from Deathloop so quickly, I am excited by the prospect of Arcane Leon working on a Blade video game for Marvel. The easy marketability of that franchise should lead to big revenue for the studio. I hope they profit enough to make room for another out there idea like Deathloop. On the other hand, massive sales from Blade could just dissuade them from any idea that's more likely to be a 1 to 2 million seller rather than a 10 million seller. There's also the risk of them just putting a Blade coat of paint on or on a non-revolutionary iteration of their core philosophy. I am part of the problem here because I would still buy that game at some point. Maybe not at full price, but I would. The built-in big franchise audience could steer them towards swinging at 80% power to ensure they get a hit, rather than swinging at 100% to go all in and get a home run or a strike. The problem is, big budget games just take too long to make. Weird games like Deathloop would really benefit from small budgets, reduced graphical fidelity, and a focus on fast iteration. I say this, but Hi-Fi Rush did not save Tango Gameworks, so what do I really know? As it stands, 4 to 5 year dev cycles means that a studio can't afford to spend 10 years of dev time on a concept that isn't a big seller. Whether it's a vapor or the genuine truth, they are completely incentivized to create new IP rather than drill deeper and hope to strike oil on something that hasn't quite panned out perfectly yet. Now, as for the lessons learned for storytelling, Deathloop just reinforces that you're only judged on what you aim for. Authors have massive control in how their work is judged. Deathloop crosses a lot of genre boundaries and doesn't exactly land every punch with absolute force, so it has much more appeal for people perfectly situated in the cross-section. And that's me. And that fact makes me extremely happy. My favorite aspect about criticizing my favorite games is that so much of the criticism could also be turned inward, that it really helps me think through the audience perspective on my own stories. Writing weird stories with heavy genre overlaps often results in very polarizing output. And even though I can say that it's obvious why Deathloop is a game that's going to have a polarized response, it's it's something that I'm just so happy that it exists because it really feels like somebody was trying to target me and saying like, okay, well, what would this guy like? I love this game design, from the choice to prevent mid-mission saves to the limitations that force you to choose the right loadouts for the job. Stealth was fun when I was weak, and combat was fun when I was strong. The pacing was amongst the best I've seen for this style of game. Deathloop reaches its thrills quickly and keeps up that intensity until the end. So many times, nonlinear games end when they run out of steam rather than ending on a high note. They often lack urgency well before their finales, but Deathloop's structure cancels out that issue. The wild way all the time loop, invasion, and combat systems come together was an absolute dream. Deathloop is a big budget oddity, something that shouldn't exist in this age of safe concepts and retreads. Sadly, you don't get the touchdown if you fumble out the back of the end zone. Deathloop is still a winner, but it was maybe 3 minutes of character development away from being my absolute favorite. Sometimes the margin really is that small. As I finished the game, I sincerely hoped there was a better ending. I was entirely willing to hunt for that, thinking maybe I needed to get a mask to enter the party or find a hidden non-violent way to pull Igor and Frank to my side and ultimately dissuade Juliana from a endless loop of blood and death. But alas, the mask maker doesn't actually make you a mask. The hints of Igor and Frank being your friends don't go anywhere. All of those potential threads that, that are placed in there in the lore, that are placed in there in the world, they don't pick them up and do anything with it. The signposting and the character detail, it suggested so much more than what was actually there. And even now, saying all of this, I realize that I call the ending an absolute failure because this game failed to reach my highest expectations, but only because I loved it so much. As always, everything I do is sponsored by yours truly. So you can support my work by buying my work. Links are available in the description and on my About page. My latest novel, Coordinated Universal Time Travel, is available on Amazon Kindle. And I'm also working on an upcoming African fantasy series to be titled Lord of Vipers. I'll have more details on the new series as it gets closer to release. And finally, thanks for watching. I know I don't post that many videos and it's been a while, but there's quite a lot of stuff in the pipeline and I'm hoping to get more to you this year. So until then, thank you.